this field north of Kensington, Minnesota in 1898, a discovery sparked what would become over a century of debate. The Kensington Runestone was pried from the roots of a tree by Olof Ohman, a Swedish immigrant clearing his farmland. It was covered in runic writing, an account of a Scandinavian party, 8 Swedes and 22 Norwegians returning to their camp to find 10 men killed. The date carved into the surface reads 1362, 130 years before Columbus. The stone's authenticity came under immediate attack. Linguists examined copies of the inscription and quickly deemed it a fraud, claiming some runes were made up or non-existent.
They never looked at the stone, they declared it a hoax, and they said he did it.
Scott Wolter, a geologist with an honorary master's degree from the University of Minnesota Duluth, was contacted in 2000 by the Runestone Museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, to perform tests on the weathering of the stone's inscription. By comparing it to tombstones in Hallowell, Maine, his St. Paul-based firm made a significant discovery.
We have evidence that shows within the inscription the weathering of the mineral biotite. At about 200 years, that mineral started to fall off the surface of those tombstones. The runestone, because all those micas are already gone, has to be older than 200 years from the date that it was discovered, because it hasn't been in a weathering environment since it's been discovered.
The data puts it well before Ohman's time, but raises another question.
If it's not a 19th century hoax, what is it? It says 1362, so there are some things that must be so based on that. The language, grammar, and runes must be consistent with the 14th century explanation if it's genuine. Everybody says, well, don't you know the scholars all say it's wrong? I said, they're wrong. They have to be, because the geology says so.
Richard Nielsen is a Texas engineer and a rune expert. He and Walter have been independently researching the inscription since 2001. Their investigation led them to a small island off the Swedish coast named Gotland, where runic traditions continued long after the Viking Age ended. Grave slabs within churches on the island bear similarities to the runestone, including one medieval rune known as the dotted R.
The experts in Old Swedish and runology only discovered this rune in 1935. The question is, how did it get on the Kensington Runestone if it wasn't known by anybody in 1898? It's on the runestone. In our opinion, it fingerprints it to medieval times.
Wolter and Nielsen's research gives new perspective to the old mystery. They feel the language and grammar of the stone, once thought proof of its falsehood, can now tie it to a mysterious and persecuted religious order and explain why 14th century Scandinavians may have traveled or even fled to Minnesota.
The ruins took us to the island of Gotland, and the date is 1362. This is during a very important period of history in that part of the world.
And especially important for one group in particular. The impact of the Crusades had given rise to military religious orders, such as the Knights Templar, formed to protect Christian passage to and from the Holy Land. They grew to be influential and wealthy throughout Europe, presenting a problem to the King of France and the Catholic Church.
Their final put down was 1314. Because they were under persecution, everything that they did now was done in secret.
While searching Gotland's churches, Wolter and Nielsen discovered Templar crosses on the runic grave slabs, an indication of their presence on the island. Many of the churches were built and inhabited by a monastic order known as the Cistercians, who had an extensive training in language and linguistics.
The Cistercians were obviously very intelligent. They worked very closely with these medieval military orders.
So closely, in fact, they risked being excommunicated for their actions. Wolter and Nielsen believe these difficult conditions led a party from Gotland to Minnesota. They believe the nature of the inscription on the runestone not only traces its origins back to the island, but also creates a likely profile of its author.
The person that carved the Kensington stone was probably a Cistercian priest and had knowledge of these grave slabs, certainly knew what the dotted R was, and understood all these runes and certainly knew how to use them.
The number 8 on the stone is punched, and 2 runes, a U and an L, are crossed. However, the mark serves no runic function.
So why is it there? Well, everybody said, well, the carver invented it. We chose to take a different approach and say, maybe it's saying, pay attention to me.
Using a medieval dating system called the Easter Table, which was known to be used on Gotland, Wolter and Nielsen plotted these runes in their appropriate columns.
Guess what year that is? 1362.
According to the researchers, the date is encoded into the inscription to protect the conventional date from alteration. But why would the carver do this?
We think the runestone is a land claim. What's the most important thing on a land claim? The date. We were here first.
In December of 2005, Wolter and Nielsen published a book of their findings entitled The Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence. It not only examines the scientific evidence of the stone, but also addresses claims brought forth over the years by critics who believed Olof Ohman carved it himself, something he denied throughout his whole life. But the research hasn't ended since the book's release. Wolter and Nielsen are continuing to uncover details of the stone's origins, hoping that one of Minnesota's greatest mysteries may finally be resolved.